Hey guys, tonight we step straight into a time when your morning tea might be the last thing you ever sip. You're in Victorian England, proper refined with lace gloves and stiff upper lips. But beneath that elegance, a quiet killer is swirling in your teacup. You sit on a floral upholstered settee, the fireplace ticking gently, and across from you, your host pours steaming tea into delicate porcelain cups. The china's got a faint crack, but you ignore it. You're too polite to mention imperfections. A lump of sugar, a dash of milk, a polite thank you, and the cup lifts to your lips. The warmth spreads down your throat along with a dusting of arsenic. You won't believe this, but sugar back then wasn't exactly pure. It was often cut with powdered substances to stretch profits. Chalk, alum, even white lead. And if the baker or grocer stored it near rat poison in similar containers, well, your cuppa just got a lot more exciting. The trouble is, poison wasn't always the result of malice. In fact, most of the time it was pure bumbling, well-meaning ignorance. Take the servant girl who prepares the sugar bowl this morning. She barely reads. She's been up since 4 a.m., boiling sheets and hauling coal. When she grabs the wrong jar off the pantry shelf, well, you'll be the one seeing stars by supper. You set the cup down for a moment, fingers trembling slightly, though you're not sure why. Perhaps it's the lightheadedness or the subtle metallic taste that wasn't there yesterday. The room spins just a bit, and your hostess notices the colour draining from your face. "Oh dear," she says. "You haven't come down with something, have you?" "No, madam. You've just joined the long and distinguished list of Victorians who've unwittingly swallowed one of history's most elegant poisons. Arsenic was everywhere back then. In medicines, in dyes, in candles, and yes, in your sugar tin. Remember, food was rarely packaged or sealed in the 19th century. The general store might keep flour, sugar, and strychnine, all in similar-looking paper cones or glass jars. One tiny mix-up during a busy market morning, and suddenly the entire village has a mystery illness. Back in London, coroner reports were filled with tales of grocers mistakenly scooping white arsenic into pastry dough or housewives, adding a bit to the rice pudding thinking it was baking soda. A tragic domestic accident. The newspapers would sigh again. And then there were the less innocent cases. In the 1,840 seconds, you could buy poison at most apothecaries without much trouble. No license, no questioning glance. Arsenic was used in everything, from facial creams to rat control, but its real trick was being odorless and tasteless. If someone wanted to get rid of you discreetly, they just had to stir it into your afternoon tea. There's a legend about a woman in Devon who ran a boarding house. Over a matter of months, she regretfully buried 5 of her wealthiest lodgers, all of whom had rewritten their wills in her favour. The neighbours thought it was suspicious. The police did not. Not until much later, when someone else in town died after having tea in the same china cup. You glance back at your cup, the dregs dark, against the delicate floral pattern. It's strange to think how something so comforting, so routine, could quietly end you. And that's the most terrifying part. It wasn't the sinister figures in dark alleys with knives. No, in the Victorian era, death often arrived in porcelain cups served by kind hands with the soft clink of a silver spoon. You smile weakly at your hostess and murmur, "Delicious," as the room continues to tilt ever so slightly. By the time the doctor arrives, you're horizontal on a fainting couch, trying not to breathe too deeply. Victorian physicians are excellent at looking concerned while doing very little, and yours is no exception. He kneels beside you, presses a gloved hand to your pulse, and frowns at your tongue like it's holding state secrets. "A touch of the vapours, perhaps," he declares. Vapours? What a wonderfully vague term. It covers everything from mild dehydration to imminent death. He prescribes rest, weak beef tea, and perhaps a tincture of laudanum. You nod, though your vision is still blurred. Laudanum. The opium in it might ease the pain right after it finishes off your remaining motor skills. He rises gently, reminding you to avoid emotional excitement. Then he tips his hat, pockets his silver fee, and disappears down the cobblestone street. You're left lying there, quietly rotting from the inside with the faintest trace of arsenic still lurking in your stomach lining. And you're not alone. In the 1,850 seconds, England was in the middle of what the press later called the arsenic century. A quirky tidbit. The government only began dyeing arsenic green when too many illiterate citizens started dying from drinking it, mistaking it for sugar or flour. The colour change didn't stop all the accidents. It just made the vomit easier to recognise. What makes all this worse is the legal greyness of it all. Poisoning wasn't illegal if it was accidental, and almost no one could prove otherwise. So when Granny slumped over the table after her third helping of Blanc-Maigre, people sighed and said she was always delicate instead of, perhaps we should investigate the pudding. As the panic grew, apothecaries came under scrutiny, but many of them were as baffled as their customers. Labels fell off, bottles got swapped, and when the village pharmacists made up 30 bottles of cough tonic with just a bit too much antimony, the coroner would scold him, but not arrest him. You might think all this chaos would have scared people into avoiding sugar or tea or suspicious hostesses. It didn't. The Victorians were maestros et denial. Even after multiple public scandals like the poisoned peppermint case, where dozens of people fell violently ill after eating sweets from a market stall, life carried on. The vendor blamed the supplier. The supplier blamed the packaging boy. The boy, he couldn't read the label. Still, none of this deterred the trend of arsenic as a beauty enhancer. That's right. Some women even took small daily doses to improve their complexion. Pale skin was all the rage. It meant you didn't have to work outside. So if you were brave or foolish, you dissolve a smidgen of arsenic in water and sip it like a health tonic. That ghostly pal, très chic. Just ignore the hair loss, fatigue, and organ failure. By now your nausea is peaking. A maid brings a glass of water. Thankfully, just water and a cold compress, though she holds it with tongs, as if touching your forehead might transfer your affliction. You hear someone whisper that perhaps you're cursed, or worse, contagious. You stare at the ceiling and wonder, will the local paper call it mysterious fainting or sudden female weakness? Either way, no one will check the sugar bowl. No one ever does. Later the week, your hostess receives a note. It reads, "Dear Madam, we regret to inform you that Miss passed peacefully in the night. No foul play suspected, likely consumption or heart flutter." She sigh, folds the note, and pours herself a quiet cup of tea from the same sugar bowl. The sitting room smells faintly of lavender and triumph. You've just had the parlour walls redone, a daring shade of green that screams wealth and refinement. Guests are already complimenting your excellent taste. So vibrant, they say, running their gloved fingers along the floral embossing. It almost glows. Yes, it does glow, especially in the dim candle light, and not in a metaphorical, charming sort of way. It literally glows, because it's laced with arsenic compounds that reflect light, just so specifically a dazzling hue known as Shields green, made by combining copper, and you guessed it, arsenic trioxide. You lean back in your chaise, proud of your recent renovations. The painter said this shade was fashionable in France. He didn't mention it was also fatal in confined spaces, but you don't know that yet. Right now, you're just trying to breathe through the slight headache that's been building all week. Here's where it gets wild. In the 1,860 seconds, thousands of British households were unknowingly lining their walls with slow death. Shields green and its successor, Paris green, were all the rage. Used in wallpaper, fabric, even artificial flowers. They were bold, eye-catching, and completely toxic. Under damp conditions, mold would break down the wallpaper and release arsenic gas. An invisible, odorless assassin that crept through nurseries, drawing rooms, and bedrooms alike. Even Queen Victoria wasn't immune to the trend. At one point, the royal palace itself featured arsenic-laced decor. When her maid fell, mysteriously ill in a vividly papered chamber, the Queen, ever so practical, ordered the walls repainted. No fuss, no scandal, just a quiet brush stroke over. The danger. You rise to adjust a curtain and stumble slightly. The dizziness, again. Maybe it's the weather or your corset or the fact that you're inhaling microscopic poison every time you admire your interior design. One of your guests, a charming barrister, compliments the wallpaper again, then sneezes uncontrollably. His nose bleeds a little. He laughs it off, dabbing politely with a monogrammed handkerchief. Must be the pollen, he chuckles. Poor man. In about 4 days, he'll be bedridden with nausea, joint pain, and terrifying hallucinations. Meanwhile, your youngest son, Thomas, has developed a summer cough that won't go away. The doctor prescribes fresh air. You open the window, but it's raining again, and the dampness only makes the wallpaper more active. Inhaling those toxic fumes becomes easier, almost inviting. You're unintentionally steeping your family in a low-grade chemical chamber. At night, you lie awake, trying to ignore the itchy eyes, the tightness in your chest, the way the baby keeps crying and won't settle. The dog won't enter the room anymore. Animals always seem to know first. Still, you don't make the connection. How could you? The wallpaper is expensive. It came from a respected merchant. The idea that something so luxurious could be harmful doesn't even cross your mind. And besides, you read that pamphlet last month, the one claiming that arsenic in controlled doses may be beneficial for the constitution. It was probably written by the same manufacturer who sold you the wallpaper. So, you host another afternoon gathering. More tea, more compliments, more poison, unseen, unsmelled, but quietly working its way through everyone's lungs like a soft, perfumed assassin. By the following week, the baby's skin has taken on a curious greyish pallor. The doctor insists it's teething. You're not so sure. He's sweating through his nightclothes, eyes glassy, breath shallow. You try moving his cradle to another room, just for a night, just to see. But already you sense it's too late. Your maid has also begun coughing, though she's too polite to say anything directly. She just tightens her apron and keeps scrubbing the hearth, pausing now and then to wipe her brow. You think it's the soot. She thinks it's exhaustion, but really it's the wallpaper. Or rather, what's coming? Off the wallpaper? Tiny arsenical particles flaking invisibly into the air, into lungs, onto skin, into drinking cups left uncovered overnight. One morning, a friend visits. She's read something alarming in the Lancet. Have you heard? She whispers, glancing at your walls, that a child in Peakham died after licking the wallpaper. You laugh it off. A child licking a wall? Absurd. But even as you dismiss it, your mind flinches toward Thomas. He liked to press his fingers to the wall patterns. Said the vines looked like dragons. You remember him tracing the outlines with sticky fingers after jam tarts. Did he lick them too? A few days later, a local scandal explodes. A well-known merchant's wife is found unconscious in her parlour. Her wallpaper, emerald green, damask, is tested by a local chemist who confirms the worst: arsenic poisoning. The case spreads like fire through the social circles. Suddenly, women everywhere are whispering about wallpaper. Invitations are declined. Parlour are mysteriously under renovation. Chemists start selling testing kits, though few know how to use them. And in the middle of it all, a German doctor named Karl von Petkofer stands up at a scientific meeting and licks a piece of arsenic wallpaper to prove it's harmless. Everyone claps. He dies years later of unrelated causes, but the demonstration soothes public panic. For now, you hesitate. The wall is beautiful. You paid quite a lot for it, and removing it would be such a mess. Besides, what would the neighbours think? So instead of scraping it off, you place a few more lavender sachets around the room. You keep the windows cracked. You place a saucer of vinegar under the baby's cradle because someone said it absorbs mesmer. But the coughing doesn't stop. The headaches grow sharper. You sometimes wake with a dry throat and a strange metallic taste in place to your mouth. There are nights you imagine the wallpaper breathing like it has lungs of its own. Then one day the maid doesn't come in. She's found collapsed near the scullery, her fingernails oddly blue. Overwork, they say, a fainting spell. You hire a new girl, but she lasts only a week. Eventually you stop hosting gatherings. The chairs in the parlour sit empty. The wallpaper peels, slightly at the corners from the damp, curling like a smile. Years later, your house is sold. A young couple moves in. They love the green walls, so vintage. The wife beams. She's 3 months pregnant. The wallpaper stays. You wake up before dawn, groggy from another restless night, and stumble toward the lavatory. The house is silent, save for the occasional creak of ancient floorboards. You clutch a candle to your chest, the flame fluttering with each step, casting long shadows on the wallpapered walls. The toilet is a tall, polished contraption tucked into a closet at the end of the hall. Oak-panelled, brass-handled, and proudly modern. Your husband had it installed just last year. A water closet, the plumber had called it. Quite the innovation. A lever flushes everything down into the sewers. Below. No more chamber pots. No more servants hauling night soil. Luxury. Progress. You raise the lid and immediately recoil. The stench that rises is not just unpleasant. It's dangerous. Thick. Sulfuric. Like a blow to the face. Your eyes water, your throat tightens, and your knees nearly buckle as you slam the lid shut. See, Victorian sewer systems were still in their awkward adolescence. London's famous Bazalgette-designed sewers were built to carry waste away, but many homes had plumbing that connected directly to the main sewer line with no traps or barriers. That meant gases, deadly explosive methane, and hydrogen sulfide could float back up the pipes and into your home at any time, especially in warm, stagnant air. Your toilet, for all its shiny fixtures, is basically a chimney for sewer gas. You stumble backward into the hallway, gasping, pressing your sleeve to your nose. A faint gurgling echoes from the pipe, like something breathing deep below the floorboards. And here's where it gets truly horrifying. People died from this. Not just from the gas itself, which could render you unconscious in seconds, but from fainting, hitting your head, or collapsing alone in a locked room. If you were lucky, someone would find you in time. If not, you'd simply expire in the lavatory. A cause of death so undignified, most families lied about it afterward. The housemaid once told you a story about a neighbour found blue lipped on the floor beside his toilet, his last act having been to reach for the pull chain. They buried him with gloves on to hide the way his fingers had curled inward from asphyxiation. You shiver and decide to wait. Perhaps later, when the sun is up and the air is moving, you'll brave it again. But for now, you return to your room, closing the door tightly behind you. You eye the chamber pot in the corner with new respect. Downstairs, the cook stokes the stove. She's been coughing lately. Probably the coal smoke, you think. But coal doesn't explain the odd metallic tang in the air, or the way the dog now refuses to enter the lavatory hallway. Later that day, your husband boasts to guests about the modern plumbing. No more smell of chamber pots, he laughs, lifting his glass of claret. You nod, smiling tightly. The guests agree. It's quite the marvel. One lady excuses herself to use the facilities. Minutes pass, then more. A servant knocks politely, no response. They force the door open. She's collapsed in a heap, pale and unmoving, the scent of sulphur clinging to her lace collar. Must have been the heat, someone mutters. Yes, the heat. Or perhaps the fact that you've built a throne directly above a miasmic death pit. By the end of the week, you've forbidden the servants from using the upstairs water closet altogether. Too unreliable, you explain, though you don't elaborate. Instead, you quietly place bowls of vinegar and dried herbs near the toilet base, the 40 old wife's defense against bad airs. It does nothing, of course. The gas isn't superstitious. It's chemical. Still, you hope. Then the night comes when you nearly don't wake up. It starts with a heavy sleep, the kind that pulls you down like a stone in water. You dream of fog and thunder, of walls closing in, of a strange pressure in your chest. You jolt upright at last, coughing, gasping. Your lungs burn. The air in the room feels heavy, wrong, wet somehow. Your husband rushes in, wild-eyed and shirtless. "I smelled something," he gasps. You both lurch toward the 14 hallway, open the windows, throw blankets over your faces like battlefield nurses. You don't realize until morning that the smell came from the pipe behind the wall, not the toilet itself. The whole house has been slowly filling with sewer gas. Now, let's clear something up. The Victorians were obsessed with miasma, the idea that smells cause disease. They weren't entirely wrong. The gases didn't spread illness in the way they believed. But they did suffocate, weaken, and even ignite. That's right, methane-rich sewer. Gas could explode. There were cases of lamp setting off bathroom blasts. You'd go in for a private moment and leave in pieces. Dignity and eyebrows gone. In response, the more cautious households began installing spens in their plumbing, a clever invention that trapped water in the pipe to block gas from rising. But it wasn't mandatory yet, and yours, unfortunately, doesn't. You have one. Your plumber was cheap. You remember the way he wiped his nose on his sleeve? Should have paid the extra £1. Meanwhile, your cousin in Manchester writes you a letter. Her youngest collapsed after using the water closet. They say it was apoplexy, but she suspects something else. The gas, perhaps, or the spirit of the drains, as old nursemaids once called it. You start noticing odd details. Brass fixtures turning green overnight. A thick, oily sheen in the bowl. The cat now refuses to go near the lavatory door. She hisses if you try to carry her past it. Eventually, the family doctor finally connects the symptoms. Headaches, nosebleeds, fainting, vomiting. He advises you to seal the toilet entirely. Board it up, he says. Better to return to chamber pots than keep breathing death. You follow his advice. The lavatory is closed with a hammer and nails. A cross hung just above the frame. Your husband installs a pot cupboard and calls it done. Privately, he's rattled. He started sleeping with the window cracked open, even in the cold. Your neighbours aren't so lucky. The lady down the street, new money, very proud of her plumbing, holds a dinner party. 8 guests, 5 of them faint. 2 are taken away with what the papers call paralytic nausea. The house is silent the next day. By evening, it's being fumigated with camphor and burned herbs. Doesn't help much. From then on, you trust your instincts. If something smells wrong, you leave. If your candle flickers near a vent, you back away. You grow sharper, less forgiving. And when the new plumber offers to reopen the toilet with modern upgrades, you shake your head. No need, you say, voice steady. We're perfectly fine with the chamber pot. Safer, simpler, and a little less deadly. You sit at the vanity, the gas lamp casting a soft glow across your reflection. Tonight's event is important. A gala with influential families, and you're expected to look your very best. You reach for the tin of pressed powder beside your combs, unscrew the lid, and gaze at the pale dust within. It smells faintly floral, clean, feminine. You lift the puff and gently dab your cheeks, your forehead, to your neck. The powder settles like silk, softening blemishes, erasing weariness, perfecting you, and slowly it's killing you. The Victorian obsession with milky, flawless skin wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a class signal. Only the poor were tanned from outdoor labor, the wealthy translucent, ethereal, like marble statues that wept chamomile tea. To get the look, women turned to cosmetics, many of which were loaded with deadly substances. Your favorite powder, for instance. It's laced with lead carbonate. Not enough to fell you on the spot, but enough to sink in. Gradually, day after day, it gets under your fingernails, into your pores. You breathe it in. You swallow it without noticing, and still you apply it again, tomorrow. Over time, you've noticed changes. A slight fatigue in the mornings, occasional tremors, hair that falls out faster than it grows in. You think it's stress or maybe age. Everyone's exhausted these days. But it's not just the powder, that delicate rouge pot, mercury sulfide, your lip tint, a cocktail of cinnabar and crushed beetles, your favorite eyebrow pencil, charcoal mixed with lamp black, and a dash of, yes, more lead. By the time you leave the house, your face is practically a museum exhibit of heavy metals. You don't know this, of course. All you know is that you look stunning, and tonight you need to be stunning. The gala is held in a ballroom dripping with gaslight and perfume. As you descend the staircase, people pause, their eyes widen. You hear one woman whisper, "She looks like a porcelain doll." You smile, you dance, you twirl, you sip chilled champagne. The room pulses with candlelight and conversation. But beneath it all, you feel it. A kind of numbness creeping along your fingertips. You shake it off. Perhaps it's the corset or the claret or the fact that your very beauty routine is turning your blood to poison. Across the room, another woman collapses gently, gracefully, like a swooning swan. Guests gather, fans flutter. She's revived with salts and murmurs. "I haven't eaten all day," everyone clucked sympathetically. But later you'll hear she was found with severe anemia, blue, lines along her gums, and signs of mercury toxicity. The whispers begin. The other women check their compacts. Some stop using powder altogether. Others switch to different brands that promise purity, though they still come in unlabeled tins and smell suspiciously of vinegar. You, however, continue because when you look in the mirror, you don't see a woman slowly unraveling. You see elegance, control, worth, and in a world that measures you by appearances that feels like power, even if it's poison wearing pearls. The morning after the gala, you wake with a dull throb behind your eyes. Your mouth feels dry, your lips slightly swollen. You reach for your face cream, your trusted ivory cold salve, and apply it as always, massaging it in with slow upward strokes. You've heard it contains zinc and lard, but there are whispers of borax and something called Prussian blue being used in some creams to brighten the skin. You don't ask questions. It works, doesn't it? Your maid hovers nearby, reluctant to meet your eyes. Perhaps she's noticed the tremor in your hands or the way you now avoid direct sunlight because it seems to burn. But what would she say? You're the lady of the house, pale, proper, powdered. Later that week, a friend invites you to a demonstration. An up-and-coming physician speaking on the dangers of toilet chemicals. The word poison is never said aloud. Of course, that would be improper, but he holds up tins of face powder and warns that the same ingredients used in rat poison and paint are being applied daily to English cheeks. The women in the crowd titter uncomfortably. A few mutter about sensationalism. One woman in the front row dabs at her mouth with a handkerchief embroidered with her initials. It's stained with blood. Still, Nothing changes. Back at home, you consider tossing the powder. You lift the tin, examine the label. There isn't one, just a scrollwork design and the words complexion preserver. You stare at it for a long moment, then you set it back down. Not today. And here's the twisted truth. Many Victorian women knew, at least in part. Rumours floated through parlours and magazines, skin-enhancing formulas that made eyelashes fall out or caused women to faint during afternoon calls. But there was always another article, another expert, another shopkeeper promising this one was safe. The real danger, they said, came from cheap imitations. So you stuck to the expensive ones. Your mirror becomes a strange companion. The face you see changes subtly. Your eyes more hollow, the skin thinner at the temples, the faintest tremble in your smile. Still you blot, still you buff, still you praise the elegance of your complexion. One day you notice a tiny sore near your jawline. It doesn't heal. Your doctor suggests it's an infected hair follicle. He prescribes a mercury salve. You nod politely, take the tin, and apply it, twice daily. The irony doesn't escape you. Eventually, society begins to shift. A French scandal involving a popular cosmetic brand causes ripples across Europe. A duchess is hospitalized. A factory girl goes blind. Whispered phrases like lead sickness and mercurial poorly begin appearing in the columns of the Ladies' Gazette. Reformers call for labelling laws, but the change is slow, too slow for you. You begin wearing gloves to bed, not for fashion, but to keep yourself from scratching in your sleep. Your nails have become brittle, your fingertips numb. You drop your teacup one morning, and the sound of it shattering makes the maid jump. She sees your face, then without powder. She doesn't flinch, but you do. You realize you've forgotten what you look like without it. That night, alone in the vanity's flickering light, you open the powder tin once more. The scent rises, familiar, soothing. You hesitate, and then, with the softest breath, you close it, just for tonight. A newborn's cry pierces the air high and frantic. You whiz, not from the sound, but from the sheer helplessness of it. The nursemaid cradles your infant, tiny, flushed, and screaming as she paces the room in slow circles. You sit propped in bed, weak from the delivery. Your night, dressed damp with sweat. Your body sore in places you didn't know could ache. But that cry, it burrows into your bones. The midwife says it's colic. The doctor says it's the mother's nerves. Your aunt blames the damp air, but deep down, something feels wrong. You glance toward the polished feeding bottle resting on the side table. It's glass with a long, soft rubber tube and ivory nipple. Modern, elegant, easy to clean. Or so, they claimed. It was a gift from your sister-in-law who said, all the fashionable mothers use them now. So, much more sanitary than spoons or cloths. You wanted to believe her. You wanted to do everything right. But the baby won't settle. He latches reluctantly, fusses, gags, his tiny stomach bloat. The doctor waves it off. Babies cry, but his skin looks greyish, his eyes too wide, too still between fits. He curls his fist tight and shakes. What they don't tell you in the pamphlets is that those modern bottles, nicknamed murder bottles by early critics, are nearly impossible to clean properly. The long rubber tubing traps curdled milk, bacteria, and mould, creating a perfect breeding ground for infection. Worse still, you're told to feed the baby condensed milk mixed with water. It's sweet, easy to find, and far less temperamental than nursing, but it's also dangerously low in nutrients and laced with adulterants, especially if bought from a cheap supplier. You think you're nourishing him, but you're diluting his strength with every drop, and there's no way to know. No smell, no taste, just a slow unraveling. By nightfall, his cries fade to weak whimpers. The nursemaid suggests paregoric, an opium-laced syrup commonly given to infants to settle the nerves. You hesitate, but the baby is writhing again. You can't bear it. With trembling hands, you allow a few drops to be placed on his tongue. He stops crying, but his breathing becomes shallow, ragged. You call the doctor. He arrives with heavy boots and a heavier sigh. He examines the child and frowns. The little ones are always fragile, he says softly. Do not blame yourself. But you do. You always will. You don't. Sleep. You sit beside the cradle and listen to every breath. You count them. You hold your own just to hear his. In the morning he is pale and still. No more crying. No more tiny fists. The bottle sits untouched on the dresser. You never use it again. The days blur after the funeral. You move like someone walking underwater, slow, weightless, numb. Friends send cards, flowers, arrive, already wilting. They say things like, God's plan, and he's in a better place, but none of it lands. The nursery door stays closed. The bottle remains on the dresser, dusty, as if waiting to be used again. You avoid mirrors, not because you're ashamed, but because of the thought that lingers every time you catch your reflection. What if I hadn't used the bottle? What if I'd boiled it longer? What if I'd nursed him just one more time, instead of mixing in that watery milk? What you don't know is that your grief echoes through thousands of homes. In 19th century England, infant mortality was staggeringly high, especially among bottle-fed babies. Reports later showed that as many as 1 in 3 infants using rubber tube bottles perished, often from diarrhea, bacterial infections or malnutrition. But back then there were no warning labels, no instructions, no boiling recommendations. Bottles were marketed as clean, scientific, modern. Some even claimed they were guaranteed safe. What they didn't guarantee was survival. And while upper-class women grieved quietly, poorer mothers faced an even harsher reality. The condensed milk they used was often stretched with flour, chalk, or even plaster dust by dishonest vendors. No regulations, no accountability, just white powder in an AG, unlabeled sack, doled out with a smile. In one well-documented case, a London charity discovered an entire batch of infants suffering from the same illness. Investigators traced it to a single milk supplier who'd been cutting his product with starch to increase profits. He shrugged. It's just a bit of filler. Your body begins to recover slowly, but your trust in modern motherhood does not. The midwife stops by one afternoon with a tightly wrapped parcel. New bottle design, she says. Easier to clean. No tubing. You don't even open. The paper. You place it quietly in the back of a drawer. Instead, you volunteer at a local clinic. You help scrub, feeding bottles until your hands chap. You boil linens. You write simple, clear instructions for new mothers. How to clean, how to mix, how to spot the signs of infection. You hold babies whose mothers are too weak to stand. And when one woman tells you, eyes wide with hope, this bottle, it's safer. Yes. You look her in the eye. No bottle is safe if it isn't clean, you say. And no baby thrives on lies. She nods, and you show her how to boil water, how to test the temperature, how to keep the tubing. If she insists on using one dry between feeds, you can't bring your son back, but perhaps you can keep someone else's. And when the nursemaid suggests repainting the nursery, you shake your head. No, you whisper. Leave it. The little blanket still draped over the fold saline. Cradle. You fold it carefully and tuck it away. Not in a drawer, but in your own bed beneath the pillow. Something to remember. Something to mourn. And just maybe, something to warn others. You, deadly homes and poisoned walls, wake to the smell of fresh bread wafting in from the street. A scent so warm and familiar, it feels like a hug. Downstairs, the maid returns from the bakery, with a paper-wrapped loaf, still warm to the touch. You tear off a piece. It's soft, fluffy, impossibly white, perfect, and perfectly dangerous. Victorian bread was not the humble, honest staple it claimed to be. You wouldn't know it by taste, of course. Bread was supposed to be comforting, safe, but in truth many loaves were laced with substances never meant for human mouths. You take another bite, still unaware that the beautiful colour and smooth texture come not from flour and care, but from additives like alum and bleaching chalk added to mimic the thinness of high-quality bread. Bakers were under constant pressure to stretch their flour, especially during poor harvests, and powdered white substances were cheap, odorless, and profitable. Your husband slathers his slice with butter and remarks how lucky you are to live near such a reputable baker. You smile. He doesn't know that even reputable bakers bought their flour in bulk from millers who themselves had no idea what was in every sack. Some bakers weren't malicious. They were just trying to meet demand. Others, they knew exactly what they were doing. And then there's the milk. You pour a bit over your morning porridge, not knowing that it too may be improved. It was common for milkmen to add water to increase volume, then correct the rent and arm colour with plaster of Paris, or sweeten sour milk with formalin, a solution that later found fame as embalming fluid. You think you're nourishing your family, but every bite, every spoonful carries a little more poison. The maid bites into her crust and makes a face. "Dry today," she mutters. You glance over her slice crumbles. Strangely. You notice it leaves behind a powdery residue on the plate. Chalky, fine, oddly bitter if you touch it to your tongue. Still, it's hard to argue with hunger. Food is expensive. There's no refrigeration, no food safety board, no inspectors arriving unannounced with clipboards and swabs. If the bread fills your belly and the milk keeps your tea creamy, what's a bit of chalk? Besides, the advertisements say it's fine. In fact, some bakers boasted about how white their bread was. Whiteness was associated with cleanliness, purity, refinement, brown bread. That was for the poor, the labourers. You were better than that. So, you keep buying the softest, whitest loaf they offer, even when it gives the baby diarrhea. Even when your stomach cramps now and then after breakfast, you never quite link the symptoms to the food. Who would? After all, it's bread. Bread is safe. Bread is life until it's not. That evening, as the loaf sits, half-eaten on the sideboard, your neighbour bursts in. Her child is ill, vomiting, feverish, barely conscious. She clutches a biscuit in her hand, one of the same kind you buy. You glance at your plate. Your stomach turns. The baker insists his goods are pure, swears he uses only the best flour. But that night, you can't help but wonder what else is baked into your daily bread. And how many mores will you sit at this table before it's your child who doesn't get up? By the next day, the rumours have spread faster than yeast on a warm morning. Something's wrong with the bread, they whisper. Children sick all over the parish. At first, you assume it's just hysteria. Nervous mothers always looking for something to blame. But then the baker's apprentice collapses mid-delivery, foaming at the mouth, and the whispers sharpen into something colder. You send your maid to the shop with instructions to return the loaf. She comes back pale, empty-handed. "They've closed," she says. "Boarded the door," said the flour was bad. Bad is an understatement. A later investigation will reveal that the flour had been cut with alum, chalk, and in some horrifying cases, ground bone or gypsum dust, all sold cheaply by a disreputable supplier, eager to make a margin. The millers claimed ignorance, the bakers claimed innocence. The children who ate the bread, they didn't get to claim anything at all. One girl, age 4, died within hours. Another older boy lost his ability to walk for weeks. Doctors began recording cases of what they called bread sickness. Nausea, weakness, burning throats, internal bleeding. Few clever physicians suspected chemical adulteration, but most still blamed the children's digestion or bad air or the Comting season. You stop eating bread for a while, switch to porridge, then potatoes. But eventually the pantry runs low. Your husband insists the new batch is safe. New mill, new bag, certified. You hesitate, then slice off a piece. You chew slowly, hyper-aware of every texture, every bitter note. It tastes fine. But that's the problem, isn't it? The poison never tastes like poison. That week, a local chemist posts a notice in the market square. Testing for adulterated flour, 2p per sample. You arrive with a folded scrap of wax paper. He pours out a bit, adds water, then something from a brown bottle. The mixture turns blue, he frowns. Too much alum, he says. Might not kill you, but it'll keep you thin. Thin? As if that's a virtue. You walk home with the uneaten loaf in your basket, but it feels heavier than stone. What makes it all worse is how social class shapes the danger. The wealthy have fresh deliveries from private bakers. The poor get whatever's on sale, day-old bread, damaged flour. If there's chalk in it, who cares? At least it's filling. And yet, the poison doesn't care about class. Even the upper crust isn't safe. In one well-known case, a noble woman was poisoned by her own cook, who'd unknowingly used arsenic-laced flour left over from rat poison bait. The bags look the same. No labels, just white dust. Eventually, Parliament takes notice. Public outrage boils over after a London boy dies eating a bright green peppermint lozenge dyed with copper arsenite. Investigations begin. The first Food Adulteration Act passes in 1860. It's toothless, voluntary, but it's something. Not that it helps you now. You dump the rest of the bread into the fire. It blackens, curls, burns. Strangely, leaves a chalky residue behind. You wipe the table slowly and whisper to the empty kitchen. No more white bread, not until you know it's clean. Your husband comes home with a cough that sounds like something's rattling loose inside his chest. He's pale, glassy-eyed, and insists it's just the change in weather, but his hands tremble as he buttons his waistcoat. You suggest rest. He declines. There's a new doctor in town, a confident fellow with a shock of black hair and a tidy sign outside his door, promising cures for everything from melancholy to gout. He visits later that afternoon. The man is brisk, efficient. He takes your husband's pulse, peers down his throat, and taps his ribs. Nervous exhaustion, he announces. Too many hours, not enough air, nothing serious. You ask about the cough. Lungs are clean, he says with a smile. Will strengthen the nerves. From his leather bag, he draws out a small glass bottle. The label is neatly handwritten. Strychnine tonic, 3 drops daily. You frown. Isn't that perfectly safe in small doses? The doctor says. Seeing your expression stimulates the system quite in vogue. Even the French are using it now. You nod slowly, but inside something twists. Because here's the thing. Strychnine is a poison, a deadly one. It's extracted from the seeds of the nux vom tree, and in sufficient quantities it causes violent convulsions, locked muscles, and eventual death by asphyxiation. But in the Victorian era, doctors used it for nearly everything. Digestive issues, fatigue, impotence, hysteria. And it wasn't the only killer lurking in your medicine cabinet. Arsenic, belladonna, opium, chloroform, mercury, all common ingredients in over-the-counter cures. Apothecaries weren't required to disclose exact formulas, and dosages were more guesswork than science. If you trusted the label, you might swallow your last sip thinking you were healing. You eye the tonic, turning the bottle over in your hands. The liquid is clear, faintly, yellow, odorless, unassuming. You place it on the mantel and say you'll remind him after supper. Instead, you spend the afternoon at the lending library combing through medical journals. One obscure entry from a country physician in Kent catches your eye. It describes a case nearly identical to your husband's. Cough, fatigue, tremors. The man was given strychnine tonic. On the third day, he collapsed into seizures and died within minutes. The doctor blamed a hidden weakness of the heart, but the wife swore she had measured every drop exactly. You return home shaken. Your husband's colour is worse. He barely touches his food. That night, as he sits in his chair by the fire, he reaches for the bottle. You step between him and the mantel. "I've changed my mind," you say, gently. "Let's try rest just for a few days." He raises an eyebrow, but doesn't rest, argue. You place the bottle back in the doctor's satchel and tuck it beneath the stairs. Later, when you empty it into the garden, the liquid sizzles faintly as it hits the stone. A coincidence, perhaps, or a warning. The next morning, your husband feels miraculously better. Not cured, no, but no worse. His colour has returned slightly, and the rattling in his chest seems gentler. You say nothing about the missing tonic. You just fluff his pillows and bring him weak tea. He thanks you, unaware that his near miss with strychnine now rests somewhere beneath the rose bushes. At breakfast, the mail arrives. Among the rage, bills and invitations, is a glossy leaflet folded and sealed with a wax crest. You pry it open. Inside, printed in elegant type, is an advertisement. Feeling sluggish, anxious, or unable to sleep? Try Dr. Chatham's nerve elixir with a gentle infusion of morphia, belladonna, and camphor. It soothes the humours and refreshes the soul. Your jaw tightens. Another snake oil. Another death trap in a bottle. And yet you remember your own sleepless nights, the anxiety, the tightness in your chest, the way your hands shook after losing the baby. There were times you'd have swallowed anything to feel calm again. Many women do. In fact, Victorian nerve tonics became a quiet epidemic, marketed to middle and upper-class women suffering from nerves or hysteria. These concoctions were laced with morphine, opium, chloral hydrate, or cocaine, often without the user's knowledge. The effect was real: sedation, relief, even euphoria. But the addiction followed silently, and withdrawal brought symptoms that were dismissed as relapse or female weakness. You recall your friend Eloise, who once confided she couldn't go a day without her drops. She thought it was a vitamin. Her husband didn't ask questions. By the end, she barely spoke above a whisper. They said she'd grown melancholic. They buried her in lace. You tuck the leaflet into the stove and light a match. But the problem isn't just the medicine. It's the system. Doctors trained by apprenticeship, not universities. Apothecaries who mix their own formulas without regulation. A culture that trusted branding more than evidence. Some physicians prescribed strychnine and arsenic side by side, believing that a pinch of one poison could cancel out the effects of the other. Logic, apparently, was optional. Worse still were the quack clinics that sprang up in seaside towns and spa resorts, offering electric therapy, ozone inhalation, and even gold injections for nervous complaints. The richer the patient, the more exotic the cure. The poor simply swallowed patent medicine and hoped for the best. One travelling salesman passed through your town last month. He carried a trunk full of green glass bottles, each with a peeling label promising vitality, appetite, and inner peace. He said his formulas came from India. Or was it Egypt? No one checked. The rector bought 6 bottles. 3 days later, he was vomiting blood. Now you keep your own medicine cabinet locked. You boil willow bark for headaches. You steep valerian root for sleep. You use camphor on your temples, ginger for the stomach, and never accept tonics from anyone whose eyes shine too brightly. Your husband recovers slowly and returns to his routine. But the bottle stays, buried, and the next time the good doctor comes calling, you meet him at the door with a polite smile and no. Invitation inside. He leaves behind another tonic. It goes straight to the roses. They bloom larger that spring than they ever have before. Your joints ache in the damp, the kind of ache that settles deep into bone. You groan slightly as you lower yourself into the armchair by the fire. The maid offers to rub your shoulders, and you nod. She disappears into the scullery and returns with a small corked bottle. The label is long gone, but you recognize the smell instantly. It's Elements Embroation, a popular liniment, thick and biting, used for everything from sprained ankles to rheumatic complaints. The menthol stings your nose as the maid works it into your skin. You feel the burn and then the relief. Warmth blooms beneath the ache. Magic almost. Or maybe something else. Because Elements wasn't just menthol and camphor. Victorian liniments were often brewed with turpentine, chloroform, ammonia, or belladonna, absorbed slowly through the skin. They were called remedies, but often functioned like slow creeping poisons. As the massage continues, your vision swims ever so slightly. You blink it away. Perhaps you stood up too fast or didn't eat enough. But no, this isn't new. You felt it before, after the last time you used the liniment, and the time before that. You think of your neighbour, Mr. Pendry, a horseman, hale and red-faced, who swore by his liniment for back pain. He rubbed it in daily, then hourly, then couldn't go a morning without it. By the end, he was stuttering, confused, and convinced someone was poisoning his tea. He died, clutching a bottle of his beloved embroation. The doctor said it was congestion of the brain. You suspect otherwise. You rise unsteadily and walk to the sideboard. There, tucked beside the silver polish, is another bottle, Holloway's ointment, claimed to cure everything from boils to melancholy. You open it. The smell is metallic, sharp. You know it contains mercury. Everyone does. But it's meant to stay on the skin, not go deeper. Still, you've seen it blister. You've seen the red patches it leaves on your husband's ankles. You close it gently and slide it into a drawer. The world of Victorian external remedies is treacherous. Pain relief often came wrapped in danger. Mustard plasters, which were used to draw out chest congestion, could cause secondary burns. Belladonna patches, meant to soothe neuralgia, sometimes led to hallucinations and heart palpitations. And chloroform rubs were beloved by the elderly until they slipped into quiet, irreversible sleep. The worst part, these cures were often homemade, passed down through generations, or whispered from neighbour to neighbour. Rub a bit behind the ears, they'd say. Had a few. Drops to the bath. There was no measurement, no caution, only faith. You return to your chair, the fire snapping quietly. Your shoulders feel lighter? Or is that the faint tingling again? You sniff the air and frown. You ask the maid to fetch a cloth and wipe away what's left. She hesitates. But it helps, Mom, she says. Yes, you whisper, but I'd rather have the pain than lose my mind. She nods, and you see something new in her eyes, understanding. Later, as you watch the flames dance, you remember a story from your childhood about a woman who used too much mustard plaster and burned the flesh, clean off her back. No one questioned it. She was fragile, they said. No, she was trusting, just like you. That night, the pain in your legs returns, dull and crawling. You lie still, staring at the ceiling, resisting the urge to reach for the ointment in the drawer. It's right, there, just a stretch of the arm away, but instead, you pull the blanket higher and count the cracks in the plaster above your head. You begin to wonder how many of your aches are natural and how many were worsened by the very things meant to heal them. In the morning, the maid brings you your usual liniment out. Of habit, you thank her, but don't open the bottle. She glances at it, then back at you, and quietly replaces it on the shelf. The silence between you speaks volumes. Across town, you learn that old Mrs. Tinsley has taken ill fits. Someone says she couldn't speak afterward. You know she used the same emulsion, rubbed it onto her temples for headaches. It likely seeped through her skin, past her blood-brain barrier, and wrapped itself around her nervous system like a fog. And yet, the products remain on shop shelves. No warnings, no measurements, just names that promise comfort. Soothing balm, gentle cure, nerve quiet. You'd almost laugh if it weren't so deadly. The druggists are no help. One smiles proudly as he holds up a new liniment made with carbonic acid and spirits of ammonia. You raise an olakolemaya eyebrow. He shrugs. It tingles, he says. The Victorian world loves a tingle. If it stings, burns, or makes you faint, it must be working. Meanwhile, your joints continue their protest. You try warm cloths, salt soaks, gentle stretches. None of it works as fast. But at least you wake up clear-headed, not half floating in a chemical haze. Then one afternoon, your nephew scrapes his knee in the garden. The maid reaches for a bottle of blue liquid, the same mercurial ointment you banished weeks ago. You stop her mid-reach. No, you say boiled water, a clean cloth, nothing else. She obeys. The child winces but heals naturally, slowly, safely, and it hits you. He'll remember the pain, but he'll survive it. That used to be enough. But somewhere along the way, you'd been trained to believe comfort at any cost was the rule. Even if the cost was sanity, or memory, or life. You begin going through your cabinet. Liniment gone. Ointments with unreadable ingredients gone. The bottle marked restorative oil with a faint skull on the stopper. Definitely gone. You replace them with things older than industry. Beeswax, lavender, vinegar, rosemary. The kitchen begins to smell like an herb garden, and when the pain comes again, as it always does, you bear it. Grit your teeth, watch the rain. But your mind remains clear, your heart steady. And in a world where the cure is often worse than the condition, that clarity feels like the rarest medicine of all. The dinner guests arrive just after sunset, their carriages lining the street like polished beetles. Inside, your home flickers with the warm glow of gaslight, each room bathed in amber, the chandelier in the dining room dancing with flame. There's pride in this modernity. The gas fittings were installed last year, and your husband still boasts about them to anyone who will listen. You light the final jet over the table, a soft hiss following the click of the valve. The room brightens instantly. Candles are charming, yes, but gaslight. It is progress. Clean, constant, civilized, and as it turns out, quietly lethal. You seat your guests beneath a canopy of flame. The table groans under the weight of the feast. Roast pheasant, pickled, onions, jelly, and moulded towers. Conversation hums, forks clink, a toast is raised, and glasses catch the light, sparkling like stars. But you can't ignore the warmth. Not cozy warmth, clawing heavy warmth, a stuffiness that clings to your sleeves and thickens the air. Someone opens a fan. Another loosens their collar. And that's when you realize the windows are all shut. The doors too, not out of carelessness, but because of the cold draft outside. And in that sealed room, gas continues to burn, consuming oxygen and releasing carbon monoxide, though no one knows to call it that yet. There's no scent, no smoke, just a creeping fatigue that settles over the room like a lullaby laced with lead. Your cousin yawns. Her husband rests his head in his hand, eyes unfocused. You catch yourself swaying slightly, your heartbeat dull in your ears. For a moment, the pudding wobbles, and seems to tilt on its plate. You blink hard. Someone laughs too loud, then slurs their words. You reach for your wine, but it tastes off. Metallic. No, it's your tongue that's changed, not the drink. You press your hand to the table for balance. The varnished surface feels unusually warm, and still the gas burns. What most Victorians don't know, what science will only explain decades later, is that carbon monoxide binds to your blood's hemoglobin 200 times more tightly than oxygen, suffocating you at a cellular level, all without triggering a single alarm in your body. It's the silent killer slipping into parlour and ballrooms under the guise of modern light. You glance up. The flames flicker wildly. That's odd. The pressure is off. Or maybe the pipe is leaking. A loose fitting. A crack in the valve. No one will notice. Not until it's too late. By dessert, half your guests have excused themselves with vague symptoms. Headaches, nausea, just a touch of fatigue. You insist it must be the roast or the wine. You fan yourself and blame the heat. But as you escort the final guest to the door, the maid finds a scorch mark beneath the sideboard. A slow gas leak, igniting unnoticed, eating into the wall. Your knees go weak. It could have caught, could have spread, could have exploded. Because yes, gaslight was a marvel, but also a menace. Leaks were common. Explosions too. Homes went up like matchboxes. One flicker, one invisible leak, and an entire household vanished in a flash. You stare at the chandelier, its jet still hissing faintly, and you wonder how much light is worth that kind of darkness. The guests are gone now, their carriages rolling off into the fog, wheels hissing over wet cobblestones. You stand alone, in the dining room, blinking against the heavy shimmer of gaslight still hanging overhead. The air feels used up somehow, thin, like breathing through a glove. You move slowly, opening a window, despite the chill. The cold air rushes in like a slap, and you gulp it, greedily, shivering, but wide awake for the first time all evening. The chandelier flickers, as if indignant at being exposed to the night. You turn the valves one by one, and the flames shrink, then vanish. And just like that, the room exhales. In the quiet, you hear the ticking of the clock again, the creak of the floorboards. The world reappears around you, no longer shrouded in golden haze. It's sobering, and it's terrifying. You begin to wonder how many others have danced beneath gaslight and never noticed the dulling edges. How many children laid their heads beneath a warm glow and never woke. How many fires were blamed on drunkenness or faulty wiring, when in fact the gas itself was the culprit seeping silently from fixtures accumulating in sealed rooms, waiting for a spark. Your mind drifts to the Millers across town. They lost their eldest son last spring. Mysterious convulsions, the doctor said. You remember their dining room lined with freshly installed wall. Jet. The whole home had smelled faintly of burnt sugar and sulphur. No one connected the dots because this was the cost of modernity. New technology sold faster than safety could keep up. Gas. Light was better than candles, they said. Safer, cleaner. But no one taught you how to ventilate or to check valves or to fear the hiss of something invisible. The newspapers spoke of it in passing. A fire in Mayfair, explosion in Kensington, but they never dwelled. Tragedy was a footnote in the name of progress. And so, you begin your quiet rebellion. Each morning you crack open every window, even if it makes your husband grumble. You demand the plumber return to inspect every fixture. You insist on lighting only one gas jet at a time, even if it flasques, leaves half the room in shadow. Darkness, you've decided, is a friend, not a threat. The servants begin placing candles again, beeswax, soft and flickering like old times. They don't light the chandelier unless guests demand it. Even then, they open every window and test the air before turning a single knob. At first, your neighbours raise eyebrows. Still using candles, they ask. You nod. I like to see the shadows, you reply. They smile, puzzled, and leave it at that. One evening, a friend visits and finds your home gently, lit, cool, and quiet. She sigh. It's peaceful here, she says. I don't know. What it island? You pour the tea, say nothing, and glance at the chandelier. Overhead. Still dark, still silent. And in that silence, you find safety. Not in the latest invention, but in what doesn't hiss when no one's listening. Your sister arrives mid-morning, flustered red in the face and visibly trembling. She doesn't sit, just paces, the drawing room rug, twisting a lace handkerchief between her fingers. I can't sleep, she says. I'm shaking all the time. I cry without cause. I feel like I'm losing my mind. You place a calm hand on her shoulder. Have you seen the doctor? She nods. He said it's she, lowers her voice. Female troubles. Hysteria. Of course he did. You already know what that means. The vague, catch-all diagnosis for anything a Victorian woman might feel that wasn't cheerful. Maternal or perfectly quiet. Anxiety. Hysteria. Irritability. Hysteria. Tired after. Raising 4 children on no sleep and boiled mutton. Must be the womb migrating around your body and making you irrational. The treatments range from bizarre to brutal. Your sister digs through her handbag and produces a small brown bottle. He gave me this. You hold, put it up to the light. Dr. Kingsley's female relief tonic. The label boasts natural herbs and a pinch of morphia. Your stomach turns because you know what's inside. A potent mix of opium, alcohol, chloroform, and who knows what, wrapped in fancy packaging and sold with a flourish. These tonics were less about healing and more about dulling the mind into submission. Women who took them did feel calmer just before the tremors began, just before they stopped remembering the names of their children. You take the bottle and place it quietly on the mantel. I think we can find something gentler, you say. She exhales, as if grateful not to be told she's overreacting. And here's the truth. The entire medical system was built around managing women's behavior, not their health. Doctors prescribed chloral hydrate for sleep, bromamide for nerves, ether for melancholy, and occasionally leeches, because of course, leeches when a woman dared to feel pain. Some were even subjected to forced rescuers, locked in dark rooms, forbidden to read, write, or speak for weeks because too much stimulation might unhinge the feminine mind. You glance at your sister. She's sitting now, but her foot jiggles nervously. She's not mad. She's exhausted. You fetch a pot of tea and spoon in real honey. You place it into her shaking hands. Tell me everything you say. She talks not just about the baby who won't sleep or the husband who doesn't listen, but about the pressure, the shame, the fear of being labelled unwell, and most of all, the terror that she'll be quietly sent away if she can't hold it together. You remember a girl from school? Bright, lively, too quick with her tongue. One day, she vanished, sent to the seaside for her nerves. They said, you never saw her again. You don't want that for your sister. You warm some water, steep a bit of valerian and lavender and hand it over. She sips slowly, colour returning to her cheeks. You're not broken, you whisper. You're tired. That's not a disease. She weeps, and for once, no one calls it hysteria. Later that week, you accompany your sister to the local chemist. The shop smells of camphor, lemon oil, and dust. Rows of glass bottles catch the sunlight like jewels, each labelled in elegant script. Tonic for the weary, essence of tranquility, calming elixir for the nervous woman. You catch your sister hesitating near a shelf lined with blue vials. One reads, drops for delicate conditions with laudanum. Your heart sinks. Laudanum, a tincture of opium and alcohol, was once in every respectable household. Mothers gave it. to teething babies. Midwives offered it during childbirth. Writers praised it in their poetry. But behind its romantic name was a trap. It numbed your pain. While binding your mind in silk ropes, you wouldn't notice until you couldn't move without it. You speak low. Not that one. Your sister looks at you, and for the first time she nods without asking why. Instead, you ask the chemist if he stocks plain herbal teas, things like chamomile, hops, lemon balm. He raises an eyebrow. Not strong enough for nerves, he says. And that's exactly the point, you reply. He shrugs and disappears into the back. While you wait, you glance around at the other customers. An older woman with shaking hands, a young girl with hollow eyes. Each holds a bottle. Each has likely been told that their discomfort is a flaw of character, that their suffering is unnatural. Not one of them was asked what they've endured, only how they plan to endure it quietly. Back home, you and your sister burn the tonic the doctor gave her. She watches the flames curl around the bottles. Label, the glass cracking gently as it turns dark. Feels like I'm committing a small crime, she says. You smile. Some crimes are necessary. In the days that follow, she rests. Real rest. Not sedation, not chemical sleep. You sit together in the garden, letting the sunlight find your face. She picks lavender and presses it into a sash. She doesn't shake as much anymore. Her appetite returns. One evening you find her writing a letter. When she sees you, she grins. To the doctor, she says, I'm telling him I won't be needing any more medicine, at least not the kind he's selling. You sit beside her, a little breathless with pride. It's a quiet revolution. Choosing discomfort over dependence. Choosing to feel everything, even the aching parts, because it's yours, not dulled, not drugged, not interpreted by someone with a clipboard and a condescending moustache. And when the next friend writes in distress, you send not a bottle, but a bundle of herbs, a note, and an invitation. Come sit with us, you. Write. You're not alone, and you're not broken. Outside, the gaslight flickers on. But inside, something else begins to glow. The marketplace is bustling. Carts creaking, boots stomping, street criers, sweet treats, hair dyes, and everyday toxins, shouting prices in rough harmony. You weave through the crowd with your basket on one arm and your gloves in the other. You pass piles of apples, wedges of cheese, fresh bread, which you eye cautiously, and then finally the sweet stall. It's a small wooden cart painted in bright stripes and draped with a cheerful banner. Pure confections for good children. Children cluster around it like flies to jam. Rows of gleaming hard candies, sugar drops and jellied fruits glister in glass jars. You spot your niece among them, her hand pressed eagerly to the cart's edge. She turns to you, eyes wide. Can I have a raspberry lozenge? Your stomach twists because you remember the Bradford sweet poisoning. It happened not far from here. In 1858, a confectioner's assistant accidentally mixed arsenic trioxide into peppermint candies instead of sugar. Over 200 people fell ill and 21 died. Children mostly. Their parents had handed them the sweets with love. No one had suspected a thing until their little bodies began to seize. You nod slowly. One piece only, and not the raspberry. Your niece pouts but obeys, because here's what you know that she doesn't. Victorian sweets were death disguised in sugar to achieve vibrant colours and long shelf life. Many were laced with lead chromate for yellow, red, lead, verdigris, mercury sulfide, and yes, even arsenic-based green. The brighter the sweet, the more likely it was to kill. The street vendor doesn't look malicious, just tired. He scoops the candies with bare hands and ties them in paper twists. You ask him where he gets his stock. From the supplier in Holborn, he mutters. Same as everyone. He doesn't meet your eye. Your niece skips beside you, unwrapping her sweet. You snatch it gently. Let me check. You Pinch it between your fingers, rub it gently on your glove. The dye streaks unnaturally, a bright chemical pink that bleeds far too fast. You hand her a plain mint instead and toss the other sweet into the gutter. She sulks. You don't apologize, because even as public awareness grows, no official laws govern candy dyes or ingredients. Bakers and sweetmakers mix powders from unlabeled tins, some with Latin scrolled on them, some with skulls, into their batches. Sometimes it's ignorance, sometimes it's profit. Always it's the children who pay. You remember another case. A girl named Eliza, aged 7, died after licking the coloured sugar off a cake at a birthday party. The newspaper blamed indigestion, but a sharp-eyed coroner found lead carbonate in the frosting. The baker was fined 5 shillings. 5. You grip your niece's hand tighter as you pass another stall. This one selling penny whistles painted a lurid red. The colour, the flakes as the children blow into them. Even the toys are suspect. By the time you reach home, your basket is half full, but your heart is heavier than ever. You pull out a cloth bag from your cupboard, the one you keep for safe sweets. You made them yourself. Honey and lemon drops, rolled in real sugar, with no colour but sunshine. You give one to your niece, she brightens. It tastes like the garden, she says. You smile, that's the point. That night, you write a letter to your cousin, whose youngest has fallen ill after eating a candied violet from a party bag. The doctor called it summer fever, but you know better. You tuck into the envelope a scrap of newspaper clipped weeks earlier, the headline still sharp. Colouring pigments and confections found to contain lead and arsenic. You underline one sentence. Symptoms mimic ordinary stomach ailments. Few are ever traced to the sweets themselves. The next morning, you visit your local chemist. Not the one who sells tonics for female nerves, but the grumpier one, with ink-stained fingers and a microscope. You place 2 candies on his counter. One is a sugar plum from a reputable bakery. The other, the lurid pink sweet from yesterday. I need to know what's inside, you say. He grunts, then spends the better part of an hour with droppers and vials, mumbling to himself. You sit patiently, your gloved hands clenched tight in your lap. Finally, he looks up. This one's harmless, he says, tapping the sugar. Plum. Just coinyl and sugar. But the other, he pauses. Traces of red lead, possibly mercury vermilion. Your stomach drops. He shrugs. No laws against it. No. Standard tests. Nothing I can do but tell you not to eat it. You nod, thank him, and drop the sweet into your handkerchief like it's a live coal. As you leave, he adds almost kindly, most people never ask. You begin speaking to other women quietly, carefully in the park, in the market, at tea. You share what you've learned. Pass along recipes for homemade sweets. Suggest wrapping treats in brown paper instead of buying the glossy ones. Some scoff. Everything's poisonous these days, they mutter. Can't be helped, but others listen. A few even bring you samples of their children's candies. You test them one by one. What's most shocking is that some of the worst come from respectable shops, the sort with mahogany counters and neat uniforms. Because while the public worries about grimy street vendors, it's often the Gentile manufacturers who cut corners with chemical dyes to make their wares look more tempting. It's all about colour. The more vibrant the sweet, the more suspicion it earns from you now. And yet bright treats continue to be sold by the bucket, handed out by loving parents, stuffed into school bags and church coat pockets. Because it's not malice, it's marketing, it's trust, it's the lie we all want to believe that if something is beautiful and popular, it must be safe. One afternoon, your niece tugs on your sleeve and offers you a bright red sugar twist from a new friend's party. You shake your head and give her a sweet you made at home instead. No dye, just rose water and honey. She wrinkles her nose, at first, but then smiles. It's nice, she says, not too shiny. Shiny isn't everything, you whisper. And as she runs off to play, you breathe a little easier. Because she's still here, because you look twice. Because one small decision might be the difference between a bellyache and a funeral. It shouldn't be this way, but it island. So, until the world changes, you carry the burden of knowing and you keep choosing safety, one quiet, colourless sweet at a time. You run your fingers through your hair and frown. There it is again, that brittle snapping sound. The little handful of strands left behind in your brush. You gently tug at the ends and WS. The texture has changed. Coarser, duller. You chalk it up to age, stress, maybe the weather. But a voice in the back of your mind whispers, maybe it's the dye. You've been using the same bottle for years. Now, a thick black liquid labelled Eclipse Hair Restorer. It promises vibrance, sheen, and eternal youth. And it delivers too. Your greys vanish with a single application. People call you ageless. You smile and thank them. But deep down you know that something's wrong. The solution has a distinct, metallic smell, sharp and sweet, like old pennies. It stains your fingers, brown if you don't wear gloves. Once it splashed onto your collar and left a mark that never quite washed out. But you kept using it. Everyone did. Because in this society, a grey-haired woman might as well vanish. What the label doesn't say is that Eclipse Hair Restorer, like most Victorian dyes, contains lead, acetate, a compound that gives hair a rich, dark tone while slowly poisoning the scalp, the bloodstream, and eventually the brain. You wouldn't know it at first. There's no sudden collapse, just small things. The fatigue, the dullness, the forgetfulness. You forget where you placed your bonnet. You forget the names of distant cousins. You forget what day at Island. Then you forget how long it's been since your last real conversation. You think it's aging. You think it's grief. But the bottle is half empty again. And your hair feels heavier than your thoughts. One day at tea, your neighbour leans in and whispers, "Did you hear about Miss Yates?" You haven't. Apparently she was found in her dressing room, dazed, slurring, unable to recall her own name. Her doctor blamed a stroke, but the maid confided in hushed tones that she'd been using Eclipse daily for over a decade. Her dresser was stained with brown smudges and tufts of brittle hair. You say nothing, but your hand shakes slightly as you pour the next cup. That evening, you stare at the bottle on your vanity. The liquid inside glows darkly in the lamp's light, like molasses mixed with ash. You open it, sniff once, and then quickly close it again. Your scalp tingles. Or perhaps it imagines that it does. Victorian women were told that beauty could be bottled, that decay could be paused, reversed, hidden. But the truth was cruel. Most of these miracles came laced with death. Hair, dyes, cosmetics, skin lighteners. So many relied on metals and acids to trick the eye. Even henna, once considered natural, was often tampered with, mixed with copper salts or iron filings to make it take better. Some women reported scalp burns. A few never woke from the sun, fever that followed. Still, the advertisements continued. Restore youth in just one rinse. Reclaim your natural colour. No more shameful silver. They didn't say no more memory. They didn't say no more mornings without pain. You look into the mirror. Your reflection is familiar, but not honest. The darkness in your hair feels like a lie now, one that leaches into your bloodstream with every rinse. And suddenly the grey doesn't seem so shameful after all. The next morning you gather the bottle's Eclipse Raven Touch, the vial marked simply number 7, and place them gently in a satchel. They clink softly like a guilty confession. You don't throw them away. Not yet. Instead, you tuck the satchel under the sink behind a pile of old linens, unsure if you're quite ready to say goodbye. But that evening, as you brush your hair, the strands fall like dry leaves into your lap. You pause, you Look down, and you know it's time. Outside, a faint drizzle paints the street in silver streaks. You step into the garden, satchel in hand, and bury the bottles behind the hedge near the base of the old lilac tree. You cover them with soil, pressing the earth down with your palms, as if sealing away something more than just glass. You return to the house with dirt under your fingernails and a strange light ache in your chest. You haven't escaped the poison, not entirely, but you've stopped, inviting it in, and already the world feels a little clearer. The next day, your maid, new, young, eager, asks why your hair looks different. It's growing back as it wishes, you say simply. She tilts her head. I think it suits you. You laugh. It feels real this time. Word spreads quietly through your social circle. A few women begin to ask questions. One admits her scalp has developed open sores. Another confesses that her memory has been slipping since she started using a new jet black rinse. You share what you've learned. Not loudly, not accusingly, just honestly. You never say stop. You simply offer a choice. And slowly some of them begin to make it. One woman switches to a walnut stain, applied only twice a year. Another allows her silver to show, then turns it into a statement with a bright brooch and a bolder lip. You host tea with them one afternoon, and the room feels peaceful, like no one is hiding, like no one is being slowly erased by the weight of false youth. Even your niece notices. She tugs on a grey curl that peeks from behind your ear. It's shiny, she says. Yes, you reply. It's honest, because in a world that taught women to paint their age away with poison, to smooth over time with metals and lies, choosing to appear as you are as an act of quiet rebellion, one strand at a time, you still keep the satchel buried, not as a secret, but as a warning, a marker of the old path and the one you're no longer on. You wake to a scream, not loud, but sharp enough to jolt you upright. It's the maid standing in the kitchen doorway, pale as bone and shaking. You follow her gaze and see it too. The pantry door swinging open, and, on the floor, a glass bottle shattered, its contents spilled across the tiles like spilled tea. But it's not tea. It's a brownish, acrid-smelling liquid, and your throat tightens as soon as you inhale. What was that? You ask. The maid stammers. I thought it was the vinegar. I was going to scrub the counters. You step forward carefully, eyes scanning the shards. The label lies half-soaked on the ground, but enough remains to make out the word disinfectant. And in that moment, the full weight of it hits you. Your pantry meant for flour, and pickles and preserves is filled with bottles that could kill. Because in Victorian households, there were no safety standards, no child-proof lids, no colour-coded warnings. Cleaning solutions were sold in unmarked glass. Some were sweet-smelling, some looked like lemon syrup. One wrong grab, one distracted moment, and someone's next breath might be their last. You crouch and sniff the spilled liquid. Ammonia, carbolic acid, maybe both. You order the maid to open every window, and you fetch cloth, soak them in water, and mop the puddle with hands that tremble more than they should. The maid sniffles. I didn't know. I didn't mean it's not your fault, you say. It should never have been stored there. And yet almost every home keeps poison next to the sugar, because cleanliness in the Victorian age was pursued with ferocity. Floors were scrubbed with phenol, linens soaked in quicklime, dishes bleached with caustic soda. People trusted chemicals because they were modern, powerful, victory over filth. But no one taught how to handle them safely. No one warned of the line between hygiene and hazard. A neighbour once told you how a youngest drank from a glass left near the stove, thinking it was cordial. It was spirits of camphor. He died before the doctor arrived. They buried him quietly, said it was a fever. In some poorer homes, rat poison was stored in teacups, tucked on shelves beside the flour, because space was scarce. and labels wore off. Death came, not in shadow, but in sunlight, in the hands of mothers just trying to clean. You make your way to the pantry and begin hauling every bottle, every jar out into the light. You inspect each one, sniffing, shaking, trying to recall which is lye, which is turpentine, which was once labelled but now wears only dust. You find a jar of blue solution, a copper sulfate mix meant for cleaning copper. You find a tin of tooth powder that smells strongly of ammonia. Even your soap contains borax and quicks, meant to bleach, but capable of blistering skin. And worst of all, they sit next to the food. Later that evening, you sit at the table with ink-stained fingers and carefully write new labels for everything. Bold, large, clear. Not just for you, but for anyone who might ever reach for the wrong thing in a moment of distraction. Because this house has survived arsenic in the wallpaper and poison in the powder, it will not fall to a mistake with the mop water. The next morning, you wake early, earlier than usual, and begin reorganizing the entire pantry. Not just the poisons, but everything. You move flour to sealed tins, baking soda far from anything labelled salts, and all cleaning agents to a locked cupboard on the other side of the scullery. You wipe every shelf, scrub away spills you hadn't noticed, and burn the old rags that smelled too sharply of camphor. The maid watches you silently, then joins in. By midday, your kitchen smells of soap and rosemary, not lying bleach, and yet you're haunted by how close it all was. Because it wasn't just one spilled bottle. It was the system, the habit, the quiet carelessness of a world so enamored with cleanliness that it forgot to make it safe. You remember hearing about a mother in Bath who dosed her infant with soothing syrup for a fever, only to discover later that the bottle had contained household ammonia. It had been moved to an old medicine vial, same size, same shape. She buried her child the next day. No inquest, just a whisper that mothers ought to be more careful. And that's the cruel trick. The blame always fell on the women, not the apothecary, who reused bottles, not the manufacturer who sold poison in green glass next to lemon cordial, not the grocer who didn't label a single tin, just the mother, the maid, the wife. You run your hands over the new labels you've written. Bold ink tied neatly with twine. The maid helps you affix them. Disinfectant. Do not drink. Poison for floors only. Bleach deadly. It feels a little like shouting into a void, but it's something. That evening, your husband returns home and opens the pantry, frowning at the new layout. Why is everything moved? He asks. You explain. He waves a hand. No one's ever been poisoned here, have they? You don't answer. Because he doesn't remember the maid's near faint last summer, after scrubbing the oven with vinegar and carbolic acid, a combination that releases choking chlorine gas. He just remembers her being sensitive. You do, though. You remember every cough, every pale face, every child laid up after licking a curious bottle or eating jam, stored in a tin that once held polish, and you're tired of the silence, so you begin talking to your neighbour, to the vicar's wife, to the girls at the sewing circle. You pass out small cards you've made, simple guides with a heading in large print. Know what's in your cupboard. You list common poisons, symptoms, safe storage tips. Some roll their eyes, some thank you quietly. A few snatch the card and slip it into their aprons without a word. And that's enough, because you can't unpoison the world. You can't relabel every bottle or watch every hand, but you can start here in your kitchen, in your home, in your world where accidents aren't inevitable. They're preventable. You lock the cupboard. You hang the key, too high. You watch your maid scrub with soap and nothing more. And when your niece asks for help mixing a bottle of place, rosewater, you smile and teach her how to label it first, just in case. The butcher arrives late this morning, cheeks flushed, apron stained, breath misting in the autumn air. He wipes his brow with the back of his hand and hauls a burlap sack from the cart to your doorstep. Inside, chops, sausages, and a joint of beef wrapped loosely in brown paper. You thank him, bring the bundle into the scullery and pause. There's a smell, not strong, not rotting, but something off. A sour sweetness that curls at the edge of your nose. You peel back the paper and your heart sinks. The beef is discoloured, slightly grey at the edges, glistening in a way that feels wrong. You call the maid, who sniffs and shrugs. It's been a warm week, she says. Maybe the cart was delayed. She's probably right. But you still can't shake the sense that the meat has seen too many hands, sat too long in the open. Air passed from stall to stall without ever seeing a block of ice. And that's the problem. In Victorian England, refrigeration is a fantasy. There are no reliable cold chains, no ice boxes in most homes, no regulations requiring butchers to store meat on ice because there isn't enough ice to go around. What little exists is often harvested from rivers, sometimes clean, sometimes not, and stored in sawdust-lined ice houses, prone to mould and rats. You slice the edge of the joint and see it, a greenish tinge near the bone. You drop the knife. The last time you saw meat, like that, was at your cousin's house. Her entire family took ill 2 nights after a Sunday roast. The doctor blamed undercooked fat, but you saw the roast, dull-eyed, wet-smelling, slumped on the carving board like it wanted to crawl off the table. And yet people eat it anyway. Because meat is expensive and waste is a sin. Because the grocer said it was fresh. Because hunger dulls caution. Because no one taught you what spoiled really looks like. Only that a bit of vinegar will cover the smell. Your neighbour once confessed that she rubbed her beef with burnt sugar and red ochre to bring back its colour, just to make it look alive again, she said, laughing. It wasn't a joke. You decide not to serve the meat. Instead, you boil some potatoes, fry a bit of bread, and open a jar of pickled onions. Supper is strange, but safe. Your husband grumbles. The maid looks relieved. Afterward, you fetch the small tin box you keep in the pantry, the one labelled test papers. Inside are strips treated with lead acetate said to detect spoilage in milk and meat. They aren't perfect, but they're something. You dip one into the runoff from the beef. It blackens instantly. Confirmation. You throw the entire cut into the fire. It hisses. The kitchen fills with a stench of fat and bile. The dog sneezes and flees the room. You open a window, hand pressed to your mouth. What unnerves you isn't just the spoiled meat. It's how normal it all island. There's no scandal, no public recall, no apology from the butcher, just another household deciding whether to eat what's on the table or risk another trip to market, and most choose to eat. The next morning, you carry the scorched remains of the beef out to the alley. A few stray cats scatter as you dump the charred mess into the ash bin. You catch the butcher, passing by, and call out that joint from yesterday spoiled. He stops, tips his cap awkwardly. Looked fine to me, missus. It wasn't, he shrugs. Blame the warm weather or the delivery boy. Then he walks on whistling. You stare after him, fuming. Not because he lied, but because he didn't even bother to lie. Well, inside you turn to the icebox, a wooden chest lined with zinc, meant to hold a block of ice large enough to keep butter firm for a day or two. You open it. The butter is sweating. The milk bottle feels lukewarm. The ice has melted to a slush, and it's only mid-morning. You close the lid with a sigh. This isn't preservation. It's barely a pause. There's no escaping it. Without proper refrigeration, nearly everything in your kitchen walks the line between nourishment and danger. Milk sour within hours. Cheese molds, eggs, unless just laid, are a gamble. Even your water stored in open jugs near the stove might, as well, have a guest list of bacteria. You recall a family in your parish who fell ill last summer. The doctor blamed a seasonal flux, but you remember their butter greenish along the rim and the jug of milk left in the sun while they were at church. Their youngest, a girl of 9, never fully recovered. Her mother still swears it was the Lord testing their faith. You think it was the cheese, so you begin a new routine. The milk is scalded on arrival. The butter is buried in a jar of brine. You begin making your own pickles, drying herbs, storing apples in sawdust and carrots in damp sand. It's tedious, but it's safer. You experiment with preservation the way some women experiment with perfumes. One day, your husband comes home to find strips of meat hanging above the stove. "Have we gone wild?" he jokes. You don't smile. We've gone cautious. And you're not alone. You learn that the doctor's wife has begun bottling her own tomatoes, fearing the tins from the grocer, which are often solid with lead-based alloy that leaches into acidic foods. Another woman down the street refuses to buy sausages anymore. Too many rumours of fillers, chalk, starch, sawdust even, crushed bone. Still, many refuse to change. They laugh off concerns, say things like, "We've been eating this way for years." But they also bury more children than they should. One by one, they come around. The saddest part, there are no villains, just tired. Butchers, hurried grocers, careless carriers, and a system that favours appearance over safety. You make a list. That night, a personal set of rules. Never trust milk after midday. Boil water if it tastes sweet. Throw out meat that looks too red. Avoid tins with dents. Taste nothing from an unlabeled jar. You post it by the pantry door, and when your niece asks why supper is so plain, you smile and say, "Because it'll keep you well." She grins, then eats it all, and you sleep better that night, knowing that at least in this kitchen, the food may be humble, but it won't hurt the ones you love. The house is quiet tonight, too quiet. You've sent the maid to visit her mother, and your husband is away at a business dinner. You light a single candle and make your way to the pantry to prepare a simple supper for yourself. Bread, cheese, perhaps some pickled onions. Your eyes settle on a row of glass bottles near the back of the shelf, and you pause. Each one is sealed with wax. Neat, identical, but you know what's inside. Rat poison, strychnine, arsenic, phosphorus paste. You stored them there months ago, thinking it's safest to keep them together, away from food, but still within reach. But now, in the stillness of the house, with no one to stop you, something about their presence feels wrong. You pull out the bottle, labelled strychnine, powdered. It's in a reused sherry bottle, corked tight. You shake it gently. The powder shifts like sand. A chill passes through you. Because these aren't the poisons that creep into your home uninvited. The wallpaper, the hair dye, the gaslight. These are the ones you keep deliberately, and sometimes they get used. You remember the headlines from last winter. Father, mother, and 2 children. Die after supper, mistaken for baking soda. A single spoonful added in error. The bottles were similar. The light was poor. The house was busy. You close your eyes. It's not rare. It's not shocking. It's common. In many Victorian homes, there's a drawer or cupboard, often in the scullery, filled with household substances. White powders, blue liquids, sticky pastes. Some are medicine, some are cleaners, some are death in a bottle, but few are labelled clearly, fewer are locked away. You set the strychnine down gently, and beside it, the arsenic bottle. This one older, with a frayed paper tag, and the faint outline of a skull barely visible beneath the tea stains. The tag reads, "For rats, not for consumption." A warning made weak by time. You recall the baker's wife who once fed her husband a bowl of porridge with a touch too much sweetener. She claimed it was sugar. They never proved otherwise. But when the coroner opened him up, his stomach lining was black. Whether she meant to or not, he was gone all the same. You think of your own pantry, of mornings when you've measured powders in a hurry, when you've poured from bottles, in the dark, when the labels were smudged or curling. You think of how easy it would be to mistake one bottle for another, and how impossible it would be to undo. That night, you sleep with the strychnine bottle on the table, beside your bed, not because you intend to use it, but because you can't stop thinking about how simple it would be to use it without meaning to. Because that's the most terrifying part. Poison, in a Victorian home, doesn't always arrive with intention. Sometimes it's just a tired hand, a dim lamp, a moment of inattention, and a bottle that looks a little too much like something else. The following morning, you make a decision. With the house still quiet and sunlight spilling across the pantry floor, you bring in a basket, a bundle of rags, and a bottle of ink. You begin by removing every bottle, every paper-wrapped cone, every tin that bears even a whisper of ambiguity. No more reused wine bottles with cork stoppers. No more powdered somethings in unlabeled jars. No more trusting your own memory to keep everyone alive. You sit cross-legged on the floor and begin writing fresh labels. Bold, black, deliberate. Poison, not food. Danger for rats only. Do not mix. You tie tags with twine. You double wrap the deadliest items and cloth, mark them with a red X, and place them all in a crate. That crate is nailed shut and carried down to the cellar, placed on a high shelf and locked behind a door with a rusted key. And even then, your hands still shake. You've heard too many stories. Like the widow who accidentally sweetened her tea with powdered arsenic because it had been stored in a reused sugar cone, or the housemaid who seasoned a soup with what she thought was flour, but was in fact plaster dust used to plug holes in the walls. You even recall a case from the papers, a woman imprisoned after her children died of phosphorus poisoning. She claimed she thought it was starch. They didn't believe her, but you do, because you see now how thin the line is between carelessness and catastrophe in a Victorian kitchen. Even the rat poison itself was made deceptively pleasant, often dyed bright green and shaped into appealing pellets. To a child it looked like candy. To a sleepy cook it looked like seasoning. Death had never worn such cheerful colours, and the manufacturers didn't help. Few provided warning labels. Fewer still included instructions. Most believed that any sensible housewife would know the difference. But what if she was tired? What if her maid was new? What if her children were curious? What if the bottles were moved during cleaning? You begin separating your pantry into strict zones. Food here, medicine there, cleaning agents in a locked drawer. You write an inventory. You hang a chart. You train the maid on every label, every precaution. She listens wide-eyed, as though the shelves might reach out and bite her, but you've seen how close they've come already. When your husband returns and asks why the biscuits taste different, you say, because they're not laced with chalk. He laughs, not understanding. You don't explain, because this isn't about fear anymore. It's about control. It's about refusing to live one moment longer with accidental weapons tucked between the spices. And from now on, in this house, nothing enters the kitchen unlabeled. Nothing is stored just for now. No bottle is mistaken. No child is buried because of a jar that looked too much like sugar. You still keep rat poison, but now it's behind a key, behind a door, behind intentional layers of safety. And the next time someone says it was just an accident, you'll remember this quiet morning, this act of reclamation, and you'll know it didn't have to be. You step into the drawing. The poison panic and its legacy room just as the housekeeper lowers her voice. But they say she meant to do it. Drop the poison right in his barley. The water. The maid gasps, and they arrested her. Oh yes, right there at the funeral. Breakfast. She hadn't even changed her gloves. You clear your throat. The housekeeper jumps. "Sorry, Mom," she says. "Just awful business." You nod, but your mind is already elsewhere. This isn't the first such tale you've heard this month. It's not even the third. Whispers of poisoning are thick in the air now, more common than gossip about new hats or bad weather. And with every new death that looks just a little too sudden, a little too convenient, the question follows like a shadow. Was it really an accident? Because the truth is, in Victorian England, poison is not only invisible, it is convenient, and often it is untraceable. The newspapers are ravenous for stories. A headline catches your eye that evening. Mother of 3 found dead. Arsenic mistaken for flour, perhaps. But then again, what makes these cases so difficult is that the symptoms, vomiting, seizures, delirium, could be anything. Typhoid, cholera, a fever caught on a cold night. Without modern forensics, proof is elusive. Suspicion, however, is not. You think of Mrs. Braithwaite, the widow who remarried after her first husband passed. Suddenly, then a second, then a cousin. Now she's moved to Sussex and taken a third. The town keeps its smile when she walks by, but no one accepts her dinner invitations. You begin to notice a change in tone among your peers. Women whisper over their teacups, about inheritance clauses, about bitter husbands, about being tired of being tired. A burnt roast used to be just a mistake. Now it's met with silence. Every case of indigestion is an eyebrow raised. The domestic sphere is beginning to feel like a stage where accidents are rehearsed with intent. You think back to your own pantry, the way it once held its share of dangers, unlabeled, accessible, innocent, until stirred. But now you see how easily a misplaced spoon could become a weapon, not just through error, but through design. Inquests were rarely thorough, and even when arsenic was found, the question remained: was it a crime or a careless mistake? A grieving widow could always say she was trying to make blanc mange. A servant might say she didn't know it was rat powder. A child might claim to have seen nothing. The ambiguity of domestic life becomes the perfect camouflage for murder, and suddenly your cupboards, your kitchen, your polite dinners, all kind of them feel like unwritten crime scenes just waiting for the right motive. You begin to wonder if the increase in accidental poisonings is truly accidental, or if people have simply learned that poison is the perfect crime. No blood, no struggle, just a stomachache that turns fatal. A slow fade behind a lace handkerchief. One moment, a husband, the next a memory, and a widow with suspiciously steady hands. You begin paying closer attention, at church socials, at teas, even in the quiet chatter of the apothecary's queue. It's subtle, but there's a shift, an undercurrent of fear, suspicion, and something darker, speculation. When the vicar's wife collapses after a cordial, people murmur politely about her heart, but someone leans in and says, she never liked elderberry. Odd that she drank it. When a shopkeeper's mother dies in her sleep, the whispers start the very next morning. He inherited the lease, didn't he? You're no detective, but you're not blind. The poison panic is no longer confined to apothecaries and careless maids. It's become a social fever, infectious, inescapable. And what's most disturbing is how often people respond not with shock, but with a sort of grim admiration. She was clever, someone says, of a woman, tried for arsenic murder, kept her hands clean for years. You think of the coroner's offices, underfunded, overworked, the outdated microscopes, the lack of chemical reagents. If a cause of death wasn't obvious, it was simply filed under natural causes. The body buried, the suspicion, if any, buried with it. And so the panic grows, not just among the innocent, but among the guilty too, because now murderers are watching how the careless get away with it. The sweet maker who used the wrong powder and walked free. The grocer who stored flour beside arsenic and blamed his apprentice. The wife who claimed the bottle on the bedside table was cough syrup. And every time the jury shrugs, reasonable doubt, no confession, no witnesses. You recall an article you read once late at night, too horrified to sleep after. A widow in Lincolnshire mixed arsenic into her husband's rice pudding over 3 days. He died slowly. She claimed she followed a new recipe. She was acquitted. The problem, you see, is not just access, but ambiguity. Arsenic was used in everything from wallpaper paste to ant traps. Lord was sold over the counter right beside tooth powder. In some households, even the jam jars were repurposed to hold corrosive lye. With no packaging laws, no enforced labelling, and no consistent bottle shapes, anyone could say, "I thought it was sugar," and to be believed. You stop accepting home-baked goods from anyone you don't know well. You decline puddings at charity auctions. You catch yourself inspecting every cup of tea at a friend's table, scanning the rim for strange colours, the surface for unnatural glints. The sugar bowl, once a symbol of comfort, now seems to whisper of risk. Not long after, a woman in your street is arrested. Her crime? They're not sure yet. Her husband is dead, her sister-in-law unwell. There's talk of inheritance, there's talk of bitterness, but there's no confession, no clear evidence. Still, they take her away. And you're left wondering, not just if she did it, but how many others have and never will be caught. The newspaper calls it another mysterious domestic incident. The court will call it inconclusive, but you call it what it island. A world where poison lives beside the pepper and murder wears the apron of routine. It begins with a headline: The Brighton Pudding Case. Widow acquitted after arsenic found in dessert. You read it once, then again. The article details how the accused, a woman named Mrs. Ashcraftoft, served a gooseberry pudding to her late husband and brother-in-law. Both fell violently ill. One died. Arsenic was found in the policing's 5 leftovers. But Mrs. Ashcroft insisted she had used only sugar. The defence argued the poison came from the kitchen utensils. The jury, visibly uneasy, returned a verdict of not guilty. The widow wept. The courtroom applauded. Outside, the press turned her into a minor celebrity. You sit in stunned silence, not because of the verdict. By now you expect ambiguity, but because of the public response. The gossip column calls her plucky. A caricature in the Penny Illustrated shows her holding a ladle like a sword, standing triumphantly over a pudding dish shaped like a skull. There's even a mock recipe circulating in the cafes. Ashcraftoft's pudding serve cold pears well with alibis. And it hits you. The poison, panic has become entertainment. People are frightened, yes, but also fascinated. The idea that the home, so sacred, so feminine, might conceal such quiet violence, it thrills them. Newspapers know this. They don't just report on poisonings. They dramatize them, turn them into serialized scandals. You recall a headline from, just last week, another teacup mystery in Mayfair. Was it an accident? A crime? No one knows, but it sells. You pass a newsstand later that day and notice an entire column titled The Weekly Widow Watch. It lists suspicious deaths. Each item is tinged with wry humour. Mr. Bellamy succumbed to biscuits. Widow claimed they were stale, not fatal. You feel a shiver beneath your shawl. And then there are the public lectures. You attend one out of curiosity, Hidden Dangers in the Household, hosted by a well-dressed man with a perfectly waxed moustache. He waves glass bottles above his head, dazzling the crowd with tales of mistaken identities and arsenic accidents. People laugh. They applaud. The woman in the front row fans herself and asks where she might purchase a test kit. He tells her not to worry. Just trust your nose, he says. Poison always has a smell. You want to stand up and scream. It doesn't. Arsenic is odorless, tasteless, unseen. That's why it works. Back at home, you find yourself collecting clippings, a sort of macabre scrapbook. One article details a woman who poisoned her husband with apple turnovers. Another involves a nanny who allegedly mistook rat paste for jam. You begin to notice patterns, the same excuses, the same phrases. She meant no harm. It was all very sudden. There was no motive save exhaustion. The public, it seems, has developed an appetite for these stories. They want women to be dangerous. The angel in the house with arsenic in her apron. The irony, of course, is that most women just want safety. Most women are trying not to die. But in a world that sees them only as caretakers or conspirators, their pain becomes plot. Their tragedies become punchlines. And the rest of you live with the knowledge that your daily life, your sugar bowl, your soup pot, your shaving water might be featured in next week's scandal. If something goes wrong, if someone dies, if the jury frowns, you will not be called unfortunate. You will be called interesting. The next morning, your housemaid brings in the illustrated London news tucked discreetly beneath a clean linen bundle. She lays it on the kitchen table face down, but the headline peeks through. Death by dart. Custard. Tragedy. Or trick. You don't need to read it. You already know the story. A respected gentleman dies after Sunday dinner. The only difference from his usual routine being an extra spoonful of dessert. His wife naturally is under polite investigation. You turn the paper over and scan the article anyway. It's written with flair. Words like diabolical and domestic treachery leap from the page. There's a sketch of the custard itself, as if the dish were the true villain. The article includes recipes, portraits, a diagram of the dining room, and a note about what the widow is wearing. Navy serge, rather. Plain. You read it all. Then you close the paper and tuck it into the stove. Because now it's not just poisonings people fear. It's the idea that any woman might be a poisoner, that every hostess is a threat, that every meal shared could be the final course. And so begins the age of suspicion. You see it in the way people decline seconds with awkward smiles, the way fathers quietly taste food from their children's plates first, the way men at dinner parties glance sideways before sipping their tea, as if waiting to fall over sideways at the slightest twinge in their belly. Even friendship can't be trusted. You attend a small luncheon. Someone brings scone. Another offers quint preserves in a glass jar. Homemade, she says brightly. A murmur passes around the back table. One woman hesitates, then takes the smallest possible bite. Another just pats her napkin to her lips and pushes the plate away, smiling nervously. You don't eat either. Not because you suspect your friends, but because you know how easy it is to mistake sugar for borax, or how jam can be tainted by a pan once used for polishing cutlery. Intent doesn't matter when the result is the same, and the press keeps feeding. The fear. They print guides for identifying symptoms. Blurred vision, burning throat, tremors, sudden silence. They publish rankings of common domestic substances most likely to kill. You can buy arsenic test kits at certain shops, now, though they're inconsistent at best. And then there's the new phenomenon, false accusations. In Liverpool, a scullery maid is dismissed after her mistress falls ill. No evidence, just a suspicion. In Kent, a grieving widow is spat upon by a man in the street because she served mushroom pie at the supper where her husband died. Even though it was a heart attack, it doesn't matter. Perception is enough. Poison, once the realm of accidents or desperate revenge, has become a ghost in every parlour, a shadow in every teacup. And women, already, weighed down by duty, silence and scrutiny, now carry one more invisible burden, proving they're not killers every time they cook. You close the pantry door with care. You label everything twice. You taste the milk before anyone else does. And at every meal, you pray that your caution will be enough, not just to keep your family safe, but to keep yourself from becoming news. Because in this world, if someone dies in your house, it won't be the doctor they question first. It'll be you, and they won't ask gently. The town. Pharmacist begins locking his cabinet. Not just at night, but during the day now too. You notice this the next time. You stop in for tincture of lavender. The glass case behind the counter, once left wide open with its rows of neat bottles gleaming in afternoon light, is now sealed tight with a brass key that jangles on his waistcoat chain. You hesitate, then ask politely, "Is everything all right?" He offers a thin smile. "Just a little extra precaution, madam. Best to be careful these days." You nod, but you understand perfectly, because while the newspapers still churn out tales of suspicious widows and pudding turned peril, the authorities have quietly begun tightening the leash. There's talk of a new law, one that would restrict the sale of poisons to anyone who cannot prove legitimate need. Some apothecaries welcome it, others bristle. But the public is split. Some say it's too late, that the damage is done, that too many bottles of arsenic have already changed hands. That poison lives in too many pantries now, and no amount of paperwork will put it back behind the glass. Others say it's the first smart thing Parliament's done in years. You aren't sure where you land, because you know the truth. The poison isn't just in the bottles, it's in the silence. The way people don't ask questions. The way a woman can request rat powder with a pleasant smile and no raised eyebrows. The way no one checks what she does with it once she gets home. But something is shifting slowly. The next time you purchase baking soda, the pharmacist asks, "For cooking, I presume?" You nod, and he writes it in a little black book, a register. You spot names scrolled on other pages. Purchases, dates, some names underlined. It feels like a ledger of sins. You notice signs appearing in shop windows. No poisons sold without verification. Household substances may be restricted. And behind the signs you see the unease. Because while the government's concern is officially about public safety, you suspect there's something more, something deeper. They're afraid of women. Not just of what women might buy, but what they might know. Because for years, it was women who boiled the soap, mixed the starch, treated the lice, polished the cutlery. They were the chemists of the home, practiced, trusted, unregulated. And now that same knowledge has become dangerous. Now the same hands that once healed are being watched, questioned, logged. And for the first time, men are realizing they no longer control the entire narrative. Because a woman can smile and serve tea. And what's in that tea? Is it lemon and honey, or is it power? You see the shift in your own home. Your husband, once dismissive of your housekeeping choices, now reads labels with newfound reverence. He no longer scoffs when you warn the children to keep away from the creed, lower pantry shelf. He locks the back cupboard himself. Not because he doubts you, but because he now understands that even an innocent mistake or the appearance of one can unravel a family's entire life. You don't mean to keep the bottle. It's just that after the law changes and the apothecary logs, every purchase and the household register is reviewed by the local constable each quarter. You forget it's still tucked away at the back of the linen drawer, behind the sachets, next to a forgotten jar of elderflower salve. It's a small, blue glass bottle stopped. No label. You remember once using it to mix moth, repellent, camphor, and lavender oil, maybe a drop of turpentine. You never thought much of it. Everyone had a bottle or two once before the panic. But now you hold it in your hand and feel a twinge of unease because now even possession looks suspicious. Even ignorance looks criminal. You wrap it in cloth and move it to a higher shelf out of reach. And yet the guilt lingers. Because that's what this new world has taught you. That even the idea of poison, not just its use, but its possibility is enough to change everything. Enough to fray trust, warp memory, reshape relationships. You visit your neighbour 2 days later, a widow named Mrs. Dempsey. You've known her for years. She always keeps seed cake in a tin, always offers you the larger slice. But this time, when she pours the tea, she hesitates. "I use new leaves," she says. "Darling, I hope that's all right." You nod, but you still watch the colour in your cup. You still lift it to your nose subtly, as if to inhale the steam. She sees. She doesn't smile, because this is the other cost, the silent, invisible one. Trust has become brittle. You can feel it in the air between neighbours, between wives and husbands, between friends who used to share soup recipes and now ask, "Where did you buy the stock powder?" with eyes that flicker just a little too long. You remember a time when housekeeping was praised, when a tidy pantry and spotless linens were signs of virtue. Now people wonder if it's too tidy, if you keep your bottles too neatly arranged, if you know too much about herbs and spices, if you're clever enough to know which combinations don't leave a trace. The legislation hasn't stopped the fear, it's only redirected to it. You hear of a woman up north who was accused of poisoning her employer. No proof, no confession, but she was dismissed, blacklisted, and left to beg work from strangers. Her only crime, knowing how to mix a poultice too well. You hear of a magistrate's wife who locked up the scullery because the maid smelled of turpentine. And you hear of a young girl who died of an infected cut because her mother, once the village's most skilled remedy maker, was too afraid to brew a single drop of tincture. Because someone might ask, because someone might talk. Because in the age of poison, every woman is guilty until proven forgetful. So, you tuck the little blue bottle back behind the sachets. You tell yourself you'll dispose of it soon. And in the stillness of the linen cupboard, the bottle waits, harmless, forgotten, or perhaps not. Forgotten, just quiet, like so many things these days. It starts as a rumour, like most things in town do. A woman, middle-aged, respectable, quiet, has been found with a locked drawer full of powders and vials. No labels, no prescriptions, no receipts, just the strange, bitter smell of something old and chemical clinging to the air. They say she was a widow. They say she'd lost 2 husbands. They say she was collecting things. You're standing in line at the butcher's when someone whispers it behind you. She was making her own poison, they think. No. Another voice counters. I heard it was just cleaning agents. Then why keep it locked up? Someone else chimes in. And just like that, another. The woman is devoured by the collective imagination. You recognize the pattern immediately, a void of certainty, quickly filled with fear, judgment, and a little theatrical flair. The town's ummelauter. The folk don't wait for a coroner's report, or an inquest, or even a formal accusation. They start drawing conclusions with the confidence of trained detectives. She was always a little odd. She made gingerbread that tasted bitter. I never liked the look of her cat. By the end of the week, the widow has been tried and condemned in the court of local gossip. She hasn't even been arrested, but her reputation is already dead and buried. You walk home that day with your basket a little heavier than usual, not because of the meat, but because of the weight of knowing how fragile safety really island. Because in this world, rumour is a blade, sharper than any scalpel. You begin to notice how quickly suspicion attaches itself to women who live alone. A single woman with too many books, a mother who doesn't attend church, a spinster aunt who makes her own preserves but never shares them. Every deviation becomes a mark against you. You once thought the poison panic was about fear of murder. Now you realize it's about fear of female autonomy. The woman with the locked drawer, she might have been storing lemon salts and soda ash. She might have been guarding personal letters. She might have just liked privacy. But none of that matters, because now every woman is expected to open her drawers, her cupboards, her past on demand. You think of the laws changing, the new requirement for every chemist to keep a log, the fact that women aren't allowed to purchase lord without a man's written consent in some towns. Now you hear someone joke at a dinner party. The best way to avoid suspicion is to act dull, and everyone laughs. But you don't, because you see what's happening. What began as public health has turned into a campaign of moral policing, a way to push women back into the soft, silent corners of the home where they were once trusted, as long as they stayed invisible. You've learned to read between the lines in newspapers. Now, when they say eccentric, they mean independent. When they say mysterious circumstances, they mean she didn't cry enough. When they say uncooperative, they mean she asked question. And when they say suspected of poisoning, it often just means she didn't do what she was told. Knock at your door. It's late afternoon and the light has that golden trial-like thickness that makes everything feel too slow. You're not expecting anyone, but when you open the door, it's a man in a bowler hat holding a small leather ledger. He smiles politely. Too politely. Just a few questions about your last visit to the chemist, he says. Nothing serious. You invite him in, heart fluttering despite yourself. He doesn't sit, just stands near the window, flipping through pages with a fingertip. Says, "Here you purchased carbolic acid last week," you nod. "For laundry?" You reply. "We had lice in the bedding." He doesn't write that down, just nods slowly. Then without changing tone, he says, "And 5 weeks ago, borax, followed by tincture of belladonna and a second bottle of ammonia." You feel your cheeks flush, not with guilt, but with the helplessness of being interpreted. Because yes, all of that is true, but out of context it sounds like a recipe. You explain the borax was for the ants, the belladonna for your daughter's migraine, the ammonia used to clean the privy pan after the frost cracked the old one. He listens, scribbles one line. You don't to know what it says. Then he thanks you and leaves with the same eerie politeness he came in with. No accusations, no warnings. But as you close the door, you realize something new. You're being watched. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you're a woman. Because you live in a time when knowledge is dangerous and it spreads this quiet surveillance. You hear of another woman, Mrs. Aldridge, who was asked by her landlord to stop experimenting with home remedies. She'd cured a neighbour's infected toe with honey and mo root. Now she's branded a kitchen chemist, which is only one shade better than witch. There are whispers that wives should stick to recipes, not ratios. You think of your mother, long dead now, who once taught you how to make furniture polish from boiled linseed and vinegar, who showed you the difference between foxglove and bluebell in the hedge, who trusted you with things. Would she have been questioned, too? You write her name in the margin of an old notebook. Then beneath it, a list: vinegar, beeswax, oil of clove, chalk, patience. That last one takes the longest to find. Because in this world, you must be patient with your words, patient with your anger, patient with the world's decision to fear you for being competent. The irony. It's still women who do the bulk of the caretaking, the cleaning, the healing. You, the suspected, are still the protector. And so you wipe your own doorknob with vinegar. You strain the family soup twice to check for bitterness. You keep your tea caddy locked. Not because you fear thieves, but because you fear accusation. Every bottle now has a twin meaning. Every powder is a shadow. And every woman carries a quiet burden to prove every day that she is not a danger, even when she is simply trying to survive. You wake up one morning to find a brown envelope slipped through your door. There's no stamp, no handwriting, just a single fold in the middle, and the faint scent of coal smoke clinging to the feed. Paper. You turn it over and over, unsure whether to open it, but you do. Inside is a small handbill. The top reads in neat, bold type, lecture. This Sunday, Street Cath's Hall. The hidden dangers of the domestic woman. You blink. Below that, in smaller print, presented by Dr. Elijah Sparrow on the case for reform and the need for surveillance in the modern home. You sit down slowly. They aren't even pretending anymore. Once the fear of poison was tucked inside headlines and gossip, now it's given stages and schedules, sermons, and seating charts. Anxieties once whispered are now printed and pinned to church doors. You walk past one later that afternoon. Another copy is nailed up with a thumbtack. You don't tear it down, you just stare. The illustration shows a woman in an apron, pretty, smiling, holding a bottle behind her back, a skull on the label, and beneath it the slogan, "Clean hands can kill." It's not even subtle. You wonder what Dr. Sparrow will say in his lecture. Imagine him pacing before a crowd of buttoned-up men, warning them about the creeping spread of female knowledge. He'll probably reference ancient Rome or some obscure statistic about widowers. You wonder if any women will be allowed to attend. At dinner that night, your husband mentions the flyer with a half smile. "Sounds a bit dramatic," he says. You don't respond because it doesn't feel dramatic to you. It feels familiar. It feels like every sideways glance in the shop, every paused sip of tea, every locked drawer, every whisper, every moment you had to explain, apologize, account for your own intelligence. This is how hysteria ends. Not with flames or trials, but with lectures and polite notices. And still, the real problem hasn't changed. Because poison is still everywhere. It's still in the cupboard, in the boot polish, in the wallpaper paste, in the arsenic flypaper curled behind your kitchen window. You once counted the number of potentially fatal substances in your home. The list reached 37 before you gave up. And yet here they are blaming women, not the factories that sell unregulated chemicals, not the lawmakers who look the other way, not the husbands who bring home mystery tonics from traveling salesmen. No, just women. Because women are visible, convenient, domestic. You used to think you were safe inside your home. But now you see the walls for what they are. Transparent. Not to you, but to the world outside. A theatre of suspicion. Every curtain, a stage. You sit quietly that night, reading by the oil lamp, and you imagine another woman in another house, opening the same envelope, sitting at the same table, looking down at her hands. The same hands that scrub floors, sew buttons, soothe fevers, and wondering if she's now seen as dangerous too. You bet she is, because the only thing more frightening to them than poison is a woman who knows where it island. The hall is full. You don't attend the lecture, but word spreads quickly, as these things always do. A friend's husband went. He said, "Dr. Sparrow was impressive, reasonable, and scientifically grounded." You hear him quote, "A home with two. Much knowledge is a home with too little safety." And everyone at the table nodded. Not you. You watch the soup simmer and think of all the homes where too little knowledge killed children before they could walk, where fevers took daughters because no one knew how to lower them, where mothers had to guess dosages by instinct because no man bothered to write a book for her. You recall the deaths that were never suspicious, only tragic. The illnesses, misnamed, the chemicals mislabeled, the furniture rotting with invisible spores. You know better. Because the real poison isn't in a woman's hands. It's in who gets to name danger and who gets believed when they speak of it. And lately, women aren't the ones being believed. You open your pantry that evening and look at every bottle with new eyes. Not fearfully, but reverently. You know each label by memory. Each cork, each stain on the wax seal. You've never used any of them to harm, but you could. And that's enough to make you guilty in someone else's eyes. Still, you don't throw them away. Because these are your tools, your inheritance, your silent legacy passed from mothers who boiled, brewed, and bandaged before there were books to tell them how. They trusted instinct and memory. You trust both. And you trust yourself. You remember something your grandmother once whispered when teaching you how to brew lavender for sleep. They'll call you clever until clever starts to frighten them. You light a candle, sit with your notebook, The one with the plant lists, the old cures, the forgotten household tricks. You add a page, signs of damp, poisoning and wallpaper. Beneath it, you write mustard gas smell, headaches, metal taste on tongue. You're not afraid because you understand now. You're not the threat. You are the witness. The world may lock its cabinets, regulate its shelves, publish its handbills, but women will still remember. They will whisper the safe ratios, the herbal blends, the antidotes that aren't in books, because someone has to. And one day, the panic will pass. The lectures will stop, the handbills will yellow and fade, and someone, perhaps your granddaughter, will find your notebook and understand that knowledge, real knowledge, isn't poison. It's the antidote to fear. And so, as the lamps flicker low and the city hushes under its blanket of soot and stars, you draw the curtains against the night. The streets of Victorian England fall silent now. No more gossip fluttering through cracks in the shutters. No more footsteps of the constable checking chemist ledgers. No more lectures accusing the quiet hands that keep homes from crumbling. You've survived it, not because you had to fight, but because you remembered. Because you stayed watchful, calm, and quietly defiant in the face of a world that feared what it couldn't control. And now you rest. Your shelves are still lined with little bottles, ginger syrup, turpentine, rose water, a jar of honey darkened with time. They are still yours, still harmless in the right hands. You know how to use them, and more importantly, you know when not to. The fear will fade. The world will move on as it always does. But somewhere, tucked into a recipe box or pressed between pages of an old cookbook, the knowledge will sleep, waiting for the next curious girl, with ink on her fingers and questions on her tongue. Let your mind soften now. Let the rush of the story ebb into stillness. Let the edges of memory blur, like candlelight on polished wood. You're safe here, wrapped not in wool, but in wisdom, quiet, earned, and yours to keep. And as your breath slows and the echoes of the past recede, all that remains is this gentle truth. You were never the poison. You were the antidote.